Listener discretion is advised.
Paxson for three! Yeah! Yeah!
In 1993, when Chicago Bulls guard John Paxson sunk the series-winning shot in Game 6 of the NBA Finals, Mark Schanowski was there reporting. In 1988, when Michael Jordan beat Dominique Wilkins in what is considered the greatest, most controversial slam dunk duel of all time, David Schuster was there reporting.
What kind of expectations do you set for yourself individually going into year 3?
In 2010, when Derrick Rose said,
"Why can't I be the MVP of the league? Why can't I be the best player in the league? I don't see why. Why can't I do that?"
It was Mark Schanowski who asked the question.
It is my distinct honor to present the 2010-2011 NBA Most Valuable Player Award to Derrick Rose of the Chicago Bulls.
In 2011, when Rose accepted the Most Valuable Player award to become the youngest MVP in the history of the league, David Schuster was there reporting. Schanowski, Schuster, two of Chicago's most accomplished NBA reporters. This is Sharpshooters.
Welcome into the second edition of Sharpshooters. I'm David Schuster. He, of course, is Mark Schanowski, and you can follow Mark on Twitter at Mark Schanowski. Nice and simple, unlike a lot of people.
Try to keep it simple, yeah.
You know, you're a very smart man. And Mark, paraphrasing John Lennon on one of the great Beatles songs, I guess we passed the edition last week, and here we're back for more.
Yeah, we're back for number 2. We had a lot of fun last week, obviously, talking about what's going on with the Bulls, talking about the league restarting, a lot of stuff to cover. We also had a long discussion about our experiences covering Michael Jordan. So if anybody wants to listen back to episode 1, we had a good time with that.
Yeah, we're going to also recite some of the experiences that we've had over the years.
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of stats work, play-by-play with the different announcers, Hall of Fame announcers. I mean, that's a long, long list. We'll get into that. You, of course, have had numerous experiences. We'll talk about our experiences with some of the players, some who have been a little bit more affable than some of the others.
Yeah, take people behind the curtain a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk initially, though, about the games that have now been played. It's been about 3 or 4 days. So far, so good, in my opinion, Mark. I mean, the level of play has been a little bit better than I even thought. I think the defense is a little bit behind the offense so
no
far.
Question.
But I think overall, the level of play has been pretty good.
I've been blown away at how good it's been. I tweeted last night that it's really been high on the entertainment level in terms of the quality of the games. Sloppy at times, but fun to watch. As you mentioned, high scoring, a lot of three-point shots, teams running up and down the court, and even with the virtual fans and the arena noise, they've created somewhat of an atmosphere there, which has kind of surprised me as well. The lighting is good. I know the players are saying it's a good shooting background, so we're seeing the offenses just taking off. And the first night, Thursday, we had 2 2-point games. I mean, this has been really a lot of fun. Houston Rockets have had 2 incredible comebacks. They were down by 7 with about 45 seconds to go against Dallas on Friday, I believe, and they came back and won. And then Sunday night, Milwaukee had them down 8 with just under 3 minutes to go, and Houston came back. Houston's going to be a fascinating team to watch. I'm still not buying it long term, but you can't argue with the results. They can get back into any game with that three-point shooting.
James Harden drives me nuts. I mean,
yeah, me too.
Obviously he's incredibly talented, but I even go back to the game, when the Bulls were playing back, whenever the first part of the regular season was, and Houston won that game by 23, if I remember correctly, and he had 42 points, and he was 9 of 19 from three-point line, if I remember correctly. But he's a ball hog, and it drives me nuts. And even in the game last night, he comes down 1-on-3, and he puts up a three-pointer. Now, I know he's a good three-point shooter, and I know when he gets hot, sometimes he can be automatic, but it drives me crazy. I guess it's okay on that team because that's the way they play basketball, but I'm going to be honest with you, Mark. If I was a teammate of his, it would just drive me nuts.
And Westbrook's really the same way at times, where he'll just dominate the ball and not even look at the other 4 players wearing the same jersey on the court. They have made it work to some degree. And early on, it struggled, especially Westbrook. Westbrook was having one of the worst years for him statistically in a long time, especially in terms of shooting the ball from the outside. And he's not a good three-point shooter. But in the game against Milwaukee, he was able to take over down the stretch. He went strong to the basket, got to the free throw line, and made his free throws. But I hate players who who flop and immediately look to the officials, and that's James Harden to a T. He does it all the time with that step-back 3 move, kicks his foot out a la Reggie Miller, falls to the ground, and wants the call automatically.
Listen, I'll never be a woman, of course, but I don't know if I could ever kiss a man who's got a beard that crazy.
Well, you're taking this into a weird direction.
I know I am.
I don't know where flopping went to that, but
I don't know. I just think about that beard. I mean, you could hide something in that beard. Anyway, all right, I got off into a tangent. I admit it. Some of the highlights that I've written down that have occurred already, and we're recording this on Monday. I mean, T.J. Warren had a great game the other day.
53.
53 points, the Pacers against Philadelphia. And I will say this, Joel Embiid is still, for me, the best big man in the game. If I was going to start with a big man who's young, and there's some other good ones, Karl Anthony Towns and a few others, but Jokic, of course, also, but I like Embiid because he hustles. That was the difference between him and Karl Anthony Towns, and I saw them play against each other. One guy would dive on the floor for a loose ball, and that was Embiid. He didn't play too many games against the Bulls early in his career because he was always injured, but when he finally was able to perform, I noticed that he would try and block shots, he would try and help out with help defense around the rim, he would dive on the floor, so I like him. Harden had 49 against Dallas, and my God, what was the score of that game at halftime? 85 to 75.
It's crazy. There's been no defense at all in the bubble.
Yeah. The only team that really has played defense so far is the team that is noted for playing defense. Well, actually, Milwaukee's noted for playing defense, but their defense has not been up to snuff, at least not yet.
Hasn't.
But the Raptors, they continue to play defense, and Nick Nurse is he's a great coach.
Yeah, as I've told you before, I'm from Milwaukee originally, so I kind of find myself rooting for the Bucks, and they have not looked that good in these first couple of games. High turnovers. I believe they had 23 turnovers against the Rockets, and they really gave that game away with sloppy play. And the whole thing with Mike Budenholzer is about offensive execution, making sure you make the extra pass, get the ball to the right guy. But Giannis showed the same thing that he showed in past playoff series where he gets tight late in games. He makes the wrong basketball play. He had a chance to lay the ball in and go up one. Instead, he tried to throw the ball to Kyle Korver, and the Houston defense was just waiting for it. And I'm like, Giannis, that's your game. Normally, he'll just take that extra step and dunk that ball. And at the very least, he had a very easy finger roll from a couple of feet to score and put Milwaukee back in front by one. And he threw the ball in the corner. And I'm like, what are you thinking about? And that's the same thing we saw in last year's Eastern Conference Finals against the Raptors, where he gets tight, he settles for jump shots, and teams will, you look at his stat line, and it's always blows you away. He had 36 points in each of the Milwaukee's first 2 games, double-figure rebounds, 6 or 7 assists. You're going, hey, Giannis had a great game, but that doesn't matter. When you're talking about a team that wants to win the championship, it's about making winning plays late in the game, and I'm still waiting. He's going to win his second straight MVP, but I'm still waiting. And the thing that's going to happen is, if they get knocked out before the finals, all you're going to hear is Giannis has to go to a team where he has more support, that it's the supporting cast. Well, it wasn't the supporting cast that screwed up down the stretch. It was Giannis making bad decisions.
A terrible play. I mean, he I don't know if he, listen, Houston, they're doing the graphics, they had the wall there, and, a lot of times he was able to get by the wall. Mexico didn't build that wall either, by the way. But, with the game on the line, I couldn't
And James Harden was guarding him.
Yeah.
That makes it even worse when you've got a guy that's given up 6 inches in the post. You just go over the top of him and score. If he has to foul you, then he'll foul you, but don't pass the ball to the corner. That's the thing that LeBron used to get crucified for early in his career, where he would get past his initial defender, he'd get into the paint, and with his strength, you knew he could finish at the rim. Instead, he'd throw the ball out to the corner to Mo Williams, and people go, what the hell is he doing?
Yeah, well, obviously Milwaukee is missing Eric Bledsoe. I mean, that goes without saying.
I don't like him either, though.
Yeah, but they're missing another player.
He would help. He would help.
I mean, I like Middleton a lot. I like his mid-range game. I like his three-point game, and you have to have another star on your team to go along with Giannis, because at some point, like you said, I mean, maybe he gets tired at the end of games. But I think they're missing something. I also think they're not taking. Either his game is starting to go downhill and he's at advanced age, or they're just not taking advantage. Kyle Korver only played, 12, 15 minutes last night? That's not enough. You should have more shooters on the court.
But there's no one that Kyle Korver can guard on the Houston Rockets, and with most teams. And that's why Budenholzer has to be really careful about where he spot plays him. He has to look at the lineup on the floor and thinking, well, who can I hide Kyle Korver on? Because I think he's like almost 38 years old now, Kyle Korver. He does not move very well laterally. So he's going to be a big minus on the defensive end, and he's not shooting the ball as he did when he was in his prime,
No, he's not.
which is to be expected. But when you look at the team, Milwaukee can go 10, 11, 12 deep, and somebody's going to lose minutes. When Bledsoe returns, when Pat Connaughton returns, Korver may not see the floor at all.
Might not at all. Another guy who's not seeing the floor at all, I think he played 4 minutes in the game against Houston, is not Brook Lopez, but Robin Lopez, who got his money, God bless him, but right now he's nothing more than a hood ornament for the Bucks.
Yeah, he can't play against the Rockets again. It's a matchup thing, and whichever team can impose their will on the other team really wins, and that's what Houston did. Milwaukee went small late because they knew that they couldn't play either of the Lopez brothers at times. Brook had a good game. I think he had like 21 and 11, and he was effective scoring against P.J. Tucker and the smaller players inside.
Yeah.
And I like Brook Lopez because he can score inside and out, and he's also emerged as a very good defender. You look at the defensive metrics, he ranks really high in terms of block shots. His rim protection is good, and he's been a very positive player for Milwaukee. But Robin doesn't have the versatility on the offensive end. He's a throwback. He's a great guy. We loved him when he was here in Chicago, but in certain series, you're just not going to see him that much when teams go small.
Mark, I know the Lakers have lost a game, and I know Milwaukee has lost a game. They're the top seeds, in the conferences. I still think both of them ultimately get to their conference finals, and I don't see anything that's changing my mind, even though some teams, it's only a couple of games
I like
for
Toronto.
most of these teams. It's going to be Toronto, Milwaukee. It's going to be the Clippers and the Lakers. I mean, I don't see any way around that.
It looks
not
that way.
Ultimately being the conference finals.
I thought Toronto just surgically took apart the Lakers the other night. They took LeBron out of the game. He did not play well. Anthony Davis has been good at the restart of the season, but Toronto is a team that does so many good things defensively. They came up with the perfect defense against Giannis in the Eastern Conference Finals last year. They did a good job against LeBron the other night. And we mentioned Nick Nurse. He should be the NBA Coach of the Year. They have a deep team. They're going to be tough. They're going to be a handful for Milwaukee if they meet up in the playoffs.
Now, not only was I watching last night's game, but of course I'm following you on Twitter during the game last night, and you came up with a name. And I just laughed because...
Oh, my guy, yeah. Payne.
Yeah, Cameron Payne, who drove us all nuts when he was a member of the Chicago Bulls. And to his credit, he had a couple of three-pointers in last night's game. Did Phoenix win that game? I think they did.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, Phoenix, I think, has won both games.
Okay.
They're actually kind of getting into that race, which is amazing because everybody thought, why is Phoenix there? Why is Washington? And those are the two teams that should not have been invited. But Phoenix has won a couple of games. I've always had a lot of respect for Monty Williams as a head coach, and I didn't watch much of that game. I've got League Pass. That was one of the only games that wasn't available on a national network. So during a commercial break, I just flipped over to my League Pass, and I saw Cam Payne hit those 2 threes, and I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. And then he kind of dances over to the bench like he does it all the time. This is what this is who I am. And I'm like, you're one of the worst players I've ever seen in my life. And he's acting like he's Russell Westbrook instead of the guy that used to dance with him.
I think he had one game that really stood out when he was a Bulls player, and that's only it. I think he had like 6 3-pointers in one game.
Yeah,
and I think wow, there's the real guy from
Wasn't
Murray
that like
State.
one of the first games of the season, too?
It could have been. I'm terrible on memory for certain things, but yeah, Cameron Payne was a bust, and that unfortunately was another major mistake by Gar Forman, if I remember correctly. Anyway,
yeah, and that trade was so bad. Taj Gibson, Doug McDermott, and we had Cameron Payne, a couple of guys they cut at the end of the year, and we had to give Oklahoma City a second-round draft pick. Yeah. Always that second-round draft pick going the other way.
There's so many stories about the Bulls and second-round picks. Portland's backcourt continues to be just fun to watch. I mean, McCollum and Lillard. And if they end up facing the Lakers, I mean, the Lakers would still win that series, but that would be high scoring, and then LeBron would probably, at the end of game, I don't know which guy he would end up covering. Would it be Lillard? Will it be McCollum? I mean, whichever guy I guess is hot.
Yeah, and Nurkic has looked really good in the first 2 games back. He's had close to double-doubles in both games. He's been efficient with his percentage from the field, and he's moving pretty well for a guy that had that really devastating broken leg a little over a year ago. So getting Nurkic back and Zach Collins back gives them a deeper team. Carmelo lost some weight during the break. He's never going to be what he used to be in his glory days with the Nuggets or Knicks, but I thought he played pretty well. They've got a team that's going to scare the Lakers if they get in there. I'm not saying they're going to beat the Lakers, but they could give them a series.
Yeah, actually, for that final spot or final 2 spots in the West, that to me is one of the more interesting things of what's going on in the bubble, because there's some talented teams in the West that are not going to make the playoffs, but obviously that's going to be a battle. Now, speaking of teams that are still battling and a guy coming off an injury, help me to understand this, because I just don't. Zion Williamson is now far removed from his injury. Why is he on a minutes limit? in these first couple of games. I don't get it.
Yeah, it's executives taking caution to the nth degree. I like David Griffin. I thought he was really good when he worked on NBA TV. I think he's a good analyst. Obviously, he's a good executive. Did a good job putting that team together. But he's taken the head of basketball operations playbook to a ridiculous level in terms of the minutes restriction on Zion. Now, Zion was away from the team. He had what was called a family emergency, and he left for about 8 days. But the kid's 19, 20 years old. I think that being away from the game for a little while, he's not going to lose all of his conditioning. No. He came back to the bubble in good shape. He dropped some weight. Everyone was saying how good he looked. I don't think they're worried about any kind of knee soreness or knee injury from the past. It's just the old executive thing that this is our franchise player, and even if we make the playoffs this year, we'll be one and done. So we're not going to push it. But I thought it was ridiculous, especially the first game where they had a good chance to win, and they sat him down, and they may have won had he been on the floor. I just don't understand it. I think they're just being overcautious with Zion.
I agree. Now, he is going to lose the Rookie of the Year award to John Morant, who in his first 2 games has played incredibly well. He's filling up the stat sheet. Yeah. Unfortunately, they haven't played. There's a team that, some of these teams that are even not going to make the playoffs in the West, whether it's Phoenix, whether it's Memphis, they are building a young nucleus of a lot of talent, something the Bulls, we'll talk certainly a lot about the Bulls upcoming here, hopefully we'll emulate going forward.
That's the hope, and they've done a good job with the draft. They got lucky. Of course, they moved up, 5-6 spots in last year's draft to get John Morant, and that's the luck of the lottery. You get a franchise player, it can turn things around very quickly. If you take John Morant away from that team, it's just a bunch of guys. You've got to have that franchise player, and Memphis was fortunate enough to get a point guard who's going to be a perennial all-star in John Morant. And they've lost 2 close games in the bubble. San Antonio, LaMarcus Aldridge not playing. They have still won 2 games, and now they're actually looking to try to make the playoffs for the 23rd straight year. It's going to be fascinating to see how that Western Conference race goes. There will definitely be a play-in situation. It's just a question of will it be San Antonio, will it be Portland? It's going to be a good battle down the stretch.
All right, so overall, I think the level of play has gone really well, better than I thought it would be. And overall, I think the whole experience of playing in the bubble, I mean, I had a lot of suspicion, and I was very skeptical about the whole thing, but I got to give a lot of credit to David Stern for what he's done so far. And go ahead, Aldo.
Adam Silver.
Oh, did I say David Stern?
Yeah.
All right, let's correct that. I don't know why I said that.
Well, I thought you were going way back in history
on
a tangent.
Let's please edit that out. God, that was really stupid. Anyway, I got to give a lot of credit to what's going on in the bubble so far. Overall, that the NBA has pulled this off. There's been very few problems. I can't even think of any off the top of my head. And Adam Silver has done a wonderful job. He did also a wonderful interview on CNN. And here's a couple of sound bites from that interview. And he says, so far, so good.
Everyone is wearing a mask on our community. Everybody is following the appropriate hand washing, physical distancing protocols, that even if somebody does have an infection, that it doesn't spread on our campus. And so far, we've been there for roughly 3 weeks, and we've had 0 cases. So it seems to be holding up and working so far.
A lot of credit to both him and everybody involved down in Orlando, which is still a hot spot, for unfortunately the pandemic, which is in Florida. But, a lot of people who have been criticizing, saying whoever ultimately wins this, that the title will be tainted. Don't tell Silver that.
I think rather than an asterisk, there should be a double gold star. It will have been, if we make it to mid-October, it will have been a 54-week season, certainly the longest season in our history. And I think that team should receive special, a trophy will double its size for the commitment and the sacrifice and just the endurance to have made it to the end of what will have been our longest season.
So, Mark, I'm sure you would agree. So far, so good overall, and a lot of credit to both him and the whole the rest of the league.
Adam Silver and his staff did a remarkable job leading up to the restart in terms of researching with medical authorities, trying to get the best plan for a bubble restart. And people are talking about what's going on in Major League Baseball, concerns about the NFL. The bubble is the key. That way you're able to keep people who are not positive in a confined atmosphere. They can interact, and you don't worry as much about the spread of the virus. So they had a good plan going in. Let's hope they can keep it going and take this to its conclusion, because the basketball's been a lot of fun. I've watched a ton of games already, and I've really enjoyed it.
As I was watching this interview, and again, we credit CNN for the interview and the sound bites from Adam Silver with Wolf Blitzer was doing the interview, and Wolf did a really good job in that, and he's a passionate basketball fan. I'm sure he goes to a lot of games at Madison Square Garden himself. And then I started thinking, there's been a lot of celebrities over the years, and you know this as well, who have been passionate basketball fans. And I'm just going to name a few right off the top. Billy Crystal was a he was a Clippers fan, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, even when they were bad, he was loyal. He was showing up to games every night.
Yeah, the Lakers, of course, with Jack Nicholson and so many others. Spike Lee with the Knicks, Woody Allen with the Knicks, and I'm trying to think who would have been that Bulls person that was always at games that was a celebrity in town. I mean, we see Oprah once in a great moon or something like that.
I don't think there really was one person that really stands out, even during the championship era, that was consistently there. You see different people parade through. John Cusack was at a lot of events, both basketball and baseball. Yeah,
I'm going to say it. Not a John Cusack
but
fan.
No, there weren't a lot of A-list celebrities. You'd see a lot of athletes from other sports coming through, but not so much in terms of Hollywood types.
No, there really wasn't. Well, Gene Siskel was a big Bulls fan back in the day. God rest his soul. He would be at a lot of games. I'm trying to think who else would have been. Anyway, more names will come to mind in just a little bit. Let's talk about the Bulls just for a second here. We also want to talk about some of our experiences. We'll get to that in just a moment. Joe Colley has been throwing out some rumors, and so have some other people. The Bulls are pretty dormant right now. I think that goes without saying. But Colley, during his Sun Times columns, has been talking about there are teams that are interested, and it's pretty obvious if you're going to trade anybody. Wendell Carter Jr. is at least a possibility. Lauri Markkanen, who I don't think they're going to trade. I think they're going to try and get something out of him. Thaddeus Young, we talked about this in our first show. I think ultimately they will do him a favor and probably trade him, but other than that, Zach LaVine, there was a rumor that maybe Tom Thibodeau, now that he's coach of the Knicks, but I don't see that happening.
Yeah, but the thing is, like in most things in today's media age, the headlines or the tweet is much better than the story itself. If you go in and read the story, it's usually just a team doing its due diligence and looking to see who might be available around the league. And naturally, with the new front office and the fact that the coaching situation is so murky right now, a lot of teams are wondering if they bring Boylen back, are there going to be players that are going to demand a trade? And that's not beyond the realm of possibilities. I don't think Zach LaVine is going to conduct himself professionally. I don't see him doing that, but you never know.
I don't think he's listen, Zach LaVine's a smart cookie.
Right.
He might subtly give you hints of how he feels about his head coach, and I know he has, but he's never going to come outwardly and just say, hey, I don't like playing for this guy and I demand a trade. And listen, he's being paid handsomely himself right now.
And he likes Chicago. We've both talked to him personally, and he likes being the big fish in the big market. He likes the fact, even though, at times you'll see him after a game, he's kind of beaten down after playing, 38 hard minutes and taking 25 shots because nobody else can carry the offense. But he also likes the fact that he's the number one star in a big market. And I think that he just would like to see the team improve to the point where he'd get more recognition for the things he's been able to do, especially on the offensive end where, guys have made all-star teams just because they score a lot of points. We saw that with Trae Young this year. Trae Young was on a horrible Atlanta team that really underachieved, and yet he made the all-star team. I think Zach is like, if we could get to be at least a 500 team and contending for a playoff spot, then maybe my contributions to that team would be recognized.
Zach LaVine has yet to sniff a playoff appearance, so he's dying. I hate to use that word, but he's dying to get into the postseason himself. Who will be that Bulls coach next season? As time goes on, and we talked about this in our initial show, it just looks like more and more and more, unless they're holding out for some reason that Jim Boylen will be the coach again. The other names that have been mentioned ever since the new regime came in is Ime Udoka and Adrian Griffin, but as of right now, there's just no smoke behind there. There's no fire behind any smoke at all.
I know that the 8 teams that were left out of the Orlando bubble are hoping to get some kind of word on what kind of plan the league's going to have for him. I don't think we're ever going to see a second bubble where all these teams come to Chicago and play a series of games. I think what they will do is they will give these 8 teams the opportunity to have a 2 or 3 week mini camp where they can require all of their players to report and go through some team workouts. I think that's the only fair way to go, because I saw somebody mention on Twitter just this morning the fact that some of these young teams are really getting some good development in these 8 games that they're playing right now that the teams that were left behind are missing out on, and that's something that Arturas Karnisovas talked about in his initial press conference, is that they wanted to have some kind of structure so they can get these guys in the gym and get a better feel for what they have on the roster.
Now, we talked about Giannis earlier, and you even broached it yet again that if he doesn't win an NBA title, the whole talk this offseason will be, okay, so is he going to re-sign with Milwaukee? Is he going to go elsewhere? And I sort of threw out this incredible long shot. Well, would he come to Chicago 90 miles south and be the biggest of the big fish in Chicago along with the rest of the Bulls? And you poo-pooed that, and I understand that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only way that could even become in play is if the Bulls would make a couple of trades to shed salary, and then go to Giannis and say you can bring in somebody else with you. Yeah. I think that's the only scenario where they get a meeting.
Well, here, I took a look, Mark, because I'm not really a capologist, and I don't even pretend to be one, but I did take a look, and the Bulls, maybe not this upcoming season because Otto Porter Jr. is still around, obviously, but the Bulls will be in really good shape more so each succeeding year. For instance, in the year 22-23, they will have nothing on their books as of right now. I mean, 0. So, I mean, if I'm Karnisovas and the new administration, maybe that's why they do keep Jim Boylan. They tread water for another year.
Oh, Bulls fans don't want to hear that.
Oh, I know they don't want to hear that, but I can almost promise you that at least the new administration is probably thinking along these lines. Tread water for another year. We get rid of Otto Porter Jr. We pare down the whole salary, and then in 22-23, we have nothing on the books.
Well, you have to figure, though, that they will probably try to re-sign Zach LaVine.
Sure.
They'll probably look to extend Markkanen and Carter, and then Kobe White is probably going to be due right about then. So all of your nothing, all of a sudden you're looking at 4 $20 million plus contracts, and you're close to $100 million already.
But that's what they're probably doing. They're probably thinking not just this upcoming season. They're probably thinking the next 3 or 4 years. I mean,
and they were, like most teams, they're pointing at 2021 because that's when a number of the elite players are going to possibly be available in free agency. But a lot of those elite players are going to get a little bit long in the tooth too. It's like you're going to go after LeBron at 37, or not that LeBron's going to change teams. He'll finish his career as the Laker, but you look at a lot of those guys, and they're getting deep into their 30s. Talking about Paul George and guys like that. I don't see the Bulls as a player for any of those type of players. Giannis is the guy that any franchise would love to be able to snag because he's still in his prime, gives you box office appeal, and he's the best player in the league right now. So that's the kind of guy that teams long for when they talk about free agency.
Well, if you believe Scottie Pippen, and I don't always believe Scottie, but in this instance I probably do. He was quoted this past week as saying no free agents are going to be coming to Chicago. And I don't know if he can say that with a new administration. He could probably with the old one for sure. But that's what he's basically saying, that no free agents will come to Chicago. So if the Bulls are going to turn into any kind of successful franchise, they're going to have to do it through the draft.
Well, we know Scottie has always held some long-standing resentment towards ownership in terms of the way his contract situation was handled, but they gave him a huge contract on the way out with the sign and trade. They worked with the Houston Rockets to move him along. They brought him back as a team ambassador. I know that Scottie, it's been reported and rumored that he's had some financial problems over the years, and the Bulls have always tried to help him out. Now Scottie's got this ESPN platform where he probably feels like he doesn't need the Bulls' salary as much as he did in the past. So he split ways with them in terms of being a team ambassador. And, they've treated him well, and still he bears a lot of resentment. I just feel like he believes he didn't get enough credit for what was accomplished during the 6 championship years, that it all went to Michael, and there's still some resentment there.
Yeah, well, that's too bad, because I still, when I take a look at that whole time frame of when the Bulls were winning championships, and even leading up to before they won the championships, Scottie Pippen was a great basketball player. Scottie Pippen was also the best teammate during that whole time. I mean, every teammate will tell you, and you saw it in The Last Dance as well, when there were problems, when there were, any kind of get-togethers, what have you, Scottie was, front and center and all that kind of stuff. He was the best teammate. Michael was, kept at arm's distance from everybody else. But all those teammates, and you work with Will, and you've worked with Bill Winnington, and you've worked with all those guys, they to a man will always tell you that Scotty was the best teammate of everybody. And on the court, I mean, he was such a good defender, and he was just a great basketball player, period.
Yeah, and I think The Last Dance has really brought that to a whole new generation. People have seen just how good Scottie Pippen was, and even for people like ourselves who saw every game, to see it again in the way it was presented, and the way that he picked up the team at times when Michael was either ill or not at the top of his game. He was a remarkable player, and you talk about guys today. People would be talking about the Kawhi Leonards and Paul Georges of the world, because Scottie Pippen was that kind of player. You know what Scottie did that he never got credit for, and I'm a big fan of this kind of part of somebody's game. He was a great bank shooter. He would hit angles from bank shots that you just never would have thought that players could do. The other great player who I always was enamored with was Jamal Wilkes, who came from he played at UCLA, I think, in college, and then ultimately he was on Golden State during one of their championships, I believe. Anyway, I just thought Scotty was such a good overall player, but I was really enamored because he would get the ball on the wing and from angles that you're just not normal to make bank shots with, but he would do that all the time. He was just a great player again. He was the perfect co-star for Jordan, and that's why the Bulls were 6-0 in the finals. All right, so if he believes that the draft is the way to go, I know you've already done some at least initial work at looking at the upcoming draft. And it's interesting because a lot of players, and we'll talk about Illinois in just a couple of seconds here, a lot of the Illinois players are going back to school, and it seems like the fact that the NBA season has been extended as late as it is, I don't know if that's the reason why some players are going back into college and taking their names out of the hopper for the draft, but it just seems like the draft might not be as deep as some people originally thought. Yeah, I think it's mostly the uncertainty with the pandemic. The NBA Draft Combine, which is normally held in May in Chicago, was postponed and may not happen at all before the draft. And I think that a lot of players who were borderline first-rounders are looking at it as, if I'm not sure I'm going to get guaranteed money, why should I go into this draft not knowing exactly where I'm going to fall and run the risk of maybe having to play in the G League or go overseas? They're looking at trying to come back and play a good college season and maybe solidify their spot in the first round. I know that is definitely what Ayo Dosunmu is thinking, because he was probably an early second-round pick in most projections. But you never know. Sometimes as the draft progresses, teams will start looking for international stash players in round 2, and U.S. college players start falling down the board. And if he's drafted in the 50s, it probably isn't a good decision for him financially to come out. Yeah, we're going to talk about Dosunmu in just a second in Illinois, but supposedly the draft lottery will still be held in Chicago, although I'm not really sure how they're going to do that. Zoom it, or, it'll be a virtual thing, right? I can't stand the word Zoom. The Zoom has become one of the worst four-letter words in sports I've ever heard of. Anyway, that's for later on this month. And I got to be honest, the last couple of years it's been here in Chicago, and I would go up to John Paxson after every one. It was always the number 7 pick, and I go, right. John, 3 7s in a row, that's great in Vegas. Yeah, he goes, but not in the NBA draft, it's not. And John always was pessimistic about his chances. I remember interviewing him before the draft. He goes, I just hope we stay where we are and don't fall backwards. That's why the one year when they did get number 1, he wasn't even watching, because he had just, it was kind of like, you picture that cartoon with a rain cloud over your head, and that's Pax in his home watching the draft. Oh, we're going to go back again, Well, maybe they should, recruit again Steve Shanwald, because I think Shanny, who he's available. Yeah, he's still available. He's golfing a lot nowadays, obviously. But, he was the one who ended up, the year the Bulls got Derrick Rose, he was the one who was in Secaucus or wherever it was. Yeah, and I felt sorry for poor Horace Grant last year, because Horace I worked with him on some of the pre- and post-game coverage at NBC Sports Chicago. They brought him in occasionally, and he got roped into being their representative at the lottery, and they dropped 3 spots, and the look on his face was like, you got to be kidding me. I'm sitting here on national television, and I've got to be the one that has to stomach this. All right, so let's just say the Bulls, I don't know, they're going to draft anywhere again. Right now, they're slotted at number 7 as of right now, and just their luck, it probably beats number 7 again, but
who are some of the names that we should be looking at already in the draft?
Well, you look at the top of the draft, the number one pick is probably going to come down to 3 players based on team needs. That would be James Wiseman, who's a 7'1" center, played 3 games at Memphis and then got in an eligibility fight with the NCAA. And so he dropped out of school and said he was going to prepare for the draft. And he's a very athletic guy, but he's more of an old school shot blocker, rim runner type of guy. He's not going to be making 15-foot jumpers. He's not going to take a shot out to the 3-point line. But for a team like the Bulls, who have a pretty good group of wing players, I think that, if you get a shot blocker like Wiseman, I think he'd be a pretty good fit for him. The other 2 guys being talked about at the top of the draft are Lonzo Ball's brother, LaMelo, who, of course, played overseas in Australia this past year. And he's a 6'7" point guard who has a funky shot, but he's good in terms of his ball handling, able to get into the paint, create shots for other players. The third guy that they're talking about is Anthony Edwards from Georgia, who's a 6'5" shooting guard. I watched him play a lot. I wasn't impressed. He's just a chucker, a gunner. Reminds me of like a Deion Waiters type.
Okay, so again, if Wiseman's available, that's a no-brainer, at least in my estimation.
Yeah.
We all saw very little of him, but we know he's got talent. If they go by position, they do need a center. Do they need a point guard? We talked about this last week. The traditional point guard has sort of gone by the wayside in the NBA, but I'm not a big believer, that they have. I don't know.
I don't think you need a traditional point guard anymore. I mean, it's a positionless league. Most teams, especially late in games, are going with 3-guard lineups with no center on the court, and they're just trying to spread the floor. Yeah, it'd be nice to have a guy who can get you 10, 11 assists a game, but I don't think that's as important as it used to be back in the 80s and 90s, where you did have the guy that was running the offense, was calling out the plays, and was the coach on the floor. I think that's kind of gone away. Now we see LeBron leading the league in assists. We see power forwards bringing the ball up the court, trying to initiate offense. It's more of a multiple ball handler system, to quote Jim Boylan, that that most teams around the league are using right now. So I think that they could get away without taking another point guard. Matter of fact, I think that would almost be a bad pick for them in this draft.
It was really interesting because last night in the game between Milwaukee and Houston, Milwaukee started 2 guys 6'11" and 7 feet, and Lopez and Giannis. And Houston didn't start a guy over 6'7", if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, P.J. Tucker was their nominal center at 6'7", and they don't care. They're just going to let you. They got out-rebounded by almost 30 last night, and it didn't matter.
It's truly amazing basketball that they play. All right, how about the wing position? I mean, obviously, Otto Porter Jr. is here one more year. I can promise you they will not re-sign him after that. Hutchinson, has shown a little bit of talent. We talked about this last time in that 10 or 12 game stretch last season, but he's had so many injuries. How bad do they need a wing player?
Yeah, I wouldn't give up on Hutchinson right yet. I think that he showed in that one stretch in February where he was healthy for about 10 games in a row. He was productive. He looked very athletic, and he looked like a guy that could fit in the modern NBA. There's a guy that I'm kind of fascinated with at Auburn. His name is Isaac Okoro. He's a 6'6" small forward. Also can play shooting guard in a pinch, but he reminds me so much of Jimmy Butler. He's an in-your-face defender. He's a guy that was playing out of position at Auburn, where they would play him at the 4 at times, because Jimmy Butler played a lot of power forward at Marquette. Okoro is a guy that I think is going to follow Jimmy's career arc. I think he'll play more, obviously, as a rookie. Jimmy didn't play at all. But I think he can be a guy that can give you defense from day one. And the Bulls need a wing defender, a lockdown defender. They don't have that on the roster right now. And I think his offense is going to improve as time goes on. Okoro is going to be a guy that's going to be in that 5 to 9 range of the draft. I think that would be a really good pick for the Bulls. The other wing is the kid from Israel, Denny Abdijah, who's considered to be really good in terms of ball handling, passing, but has not shot the ball well from 3-point range. And I'm not a big fan of guys who can't shoot the ball very well.
All right, we talked earlier in the podcast here about Ayo Dosunmu at Illinois, and he is coming back, and he's a 6'5" guard. He's not your traditional shooting guard. I mean, he can get to the basket, what we've noticed so far. I mean, I give him a lot of credit, though, because a lot of the players from Chicago and even the state of Illinois bypass going to Illinois, but he's taken a lot of pride, and maybe he's opened the floodgates for more players from the city to go back down to Illinois under the new coach, Brad Underwood. So he's coming back, and I think even more importantly for Illinois, Kofi Cockburn, who was the freshman of the year in the Big Ten last year, year, he averaged 13 points, 9 rebounds. He's a big dude, by the way. He's a legit 7-footer. I think he carries a little bit too much weight on his frame right now. He's at 295, supposedly. So Illinois is going to be pretty decent going forward next season.
Yeah, I was looking at a preseason list of the top 10, and there were 4 Big Ten teams in the top 10. So the Big Ten's going to be loaded. They mentioned Iowa with Garza coming back. He announced this week that he's going to return for his final season with the Hawkeyes, and he led the Big Ten in scoring last year. Then Michigan State, as always, and Wisconsin. So there were 4, and Illinois. Illinois was ranked 9th. This was Jeff Goodman in his preseason top 10, had 4 Big Ten teams in the top 10. And Illinois, they really closed the season well. I was really excited to see what they might have been able to do in the Big Ten and NCAA tournaments. They're a team that can come at you in waves. They had a good recruiting class coming in. I think they're going to be a lot of fun to watch. And to Io's credit, he mentioned in a Zoom conference with reporters yesterday that he would have probably gone pro had it not been for the pandemic. There was just too much uncertainty. Didn't get a chance to impress scouts at the combine, and he just felt like he was better off rather than slipping in the second round to come back and hopefully lead Illinois to a Big Ten championship and maybe lock himself in as a first-round pick for next year's draft.
Yeah, so a lot of good news coming out of Champaign. Unfortunately, the bad news coming out of Champaign was the recent passing away of Lou Henson, who is one of the all-time coaches, not only on the court, but certainly was such a good man to be around. He took such pride in wearing that Orange Crush jacket over the years.
Yeah.
779 career wins against 412 losses. He started at Harden Simmons. Then he went to New Mexico State, then to Illinois, and then he finished off his career going back to New Mexico State, and still was a pretty successful coach, and then finally retired. And I don't think there's ever a player that ever played for Lou Henson that was not a fan of him as a human being, because his players loved him.
Yeah, well, Kendall Gill's a really good friend of mine, and he just adores Lou Henson. Just said that Lou, what you saw with Lou, in terms of his public comments and the way he carries himself in the public arena, he was even better off the public airwaves. Just a prince of a man who was treated his players so well, had total respect for his players. And I actually worked in Champaign for 5 years. We were doing TV at the NBC affiliate there, and so I got to know Lou really well. And he was as good as they come, just a kind and generous soul, and he did things the right way. They had a really good program. They recruited Chicago well over the years with Jimmy Collins as his lead recruiter when I was there. Of course, there was the NCAA questions and all that stuff that got them in some issues with the NCAA. But I just really enjoyed working with Lou. I thought he was a fantastic guy. And I'll tell you the story. That one time he got mad at me. He couldn't even pull that off. We would have, I would interview him like 3 times a week during basketball season, working for the local affiliate. And one day I went and I'm asking questions, and he's giving me these really short answers and really kind of almost biting his words. And we finished the interview, and he goes, Mark, he goes, come over here, I want to talk to you about something. And so we got away from the cameras and stuff, and he said, I heard that you were criticizing me on the air last night. And I'm like this. Then they had a really bad loss. I believe it was against Purdue. They blew a 10-point lead late, and I forget exactly what I said, but it certainly wasn't that Lou Henson's a bad coach, and he was an idiot for the way they handle things down the stretch. I think it was more of a question of criticizing some of the strategy late, and I just explained it to him, and he goes, all right, I thought I couldn't imagine you would say anything bad. So even trying to be mad at me, it was over in about 30 seconds.
He never really had a crossword for anybody, but there was one person who I'm going with this. He never really liked Bobby Knight. You could always feel it whenever Illinois would play Indiana, and he would look across the court at Bobby Knight, and he just, I don't know, there was almost a disdain against Bobby Knight. There was a big rivalry because both programs are really good for a stretch of time against each other, but that was one guy I just know he was not a fan of.
Yeah, he had the one famous press conference where he called Knight a classic bully, and he was like almost shouting at that point. And the one great win, there were so many great wins for the 89 Flying Illini, but the time they went into Bloomington and Nick Anderson hit that 40-foot jump shot at the buzzer to beat Knight, and that Henson treasured that win probably as much as anyone in his career.
That is the Flying Illini, the 88-89 team, and obviously Kendall was a big part of that. Kenny Battle, Nick
He's
Anderson.
so bitter they didn't win that championship.
Well,
they had beaten Michigan twice during the season. And remember, that was a really good game. It was a high-scoring game.
83-81.
And, both teams played well. Illinois couldn't get a key rebound late, and that was the difference in the game. But they had handled Michigan easily. And, as any athlete, Kendall feels like, well, we were better than the 05 team. We're the best team in Illinois history. And he's probably right about that.
I 100% agree with him. Again, Nick was a part of that team. Kenny Battle, Kendall, Steve Bardo, our good friend. Marcus Liberty, a young Marcus Liberty at that juncture. Lowell Hamilton. I mean, that team was loaded, and they were fun to watch. And they were all, I wouldn't call them all exactly similar kind of players, but they were all 6'6", 6'7", 6'8", and they could all, that's why they were the Flying Illini. It was I would agree with Kendall. That team was better than the 05 team. The 05 team went to the championship, of course, and lost to North Carolina. But that 88-89 team was still one of my favorite teams of all time.
It was one of the most fun teams to watch in college basketball, and you don't have to be a resident of the state of Illinois to appreciate that team, because now you see people, when I'm out with Kendall, people from all over the country say, I watched you play. That Flying Illini team was so much fun to watch. And it's one of those teams that transcends time. People do remember that. When you think about the great college basketball teams, they lost in the national semifinals, but yet people look back so fondly on that group because they played above the rim, they had great athletes, and they really enjoyed playing with each other, and that joy came through on the court.
And they're still close with each other. I know Kendall's close with almost everybody anyway, but he and Stephen Bardo are the best of friends, and so many of those other guys on the team. And when they do have reunions, you can feel the passionate, camaraderie between all of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting to see that group had a reunion, a 30-year reunion at Assembly Hall, and it was just kind of a joy fest that even the fans that were too young to have watched that welcomed them back, and everyone had heard stories from their parents or their relatives about the Flying Illini.
So, Mark, one of the things that you and I bring to this particular podcast, Sharpshooters, is that we both have vast experience doing what we've been doing for a lot of years, and we're both obviously very passionate about the game of basketball. And I've been very lucky myself to work with other people who are very passionate. I've worked with almost every announcer over the last, it's decades now, I hate to say it, Hall of Famers, whether it was...
Yeah, I see you smirking all the time. It's funny, we see the shot of the press table, and there's David in between the two visiting broadcasters thinking, why did that guy say that? Well, I mean, I couldn't read your mind, but at certain times I'm wondering, you got any stories about either some classic screw-ups or some talk in the commercial breaks that made you roll your eyes a little bit?
Yeah, actually I do, and we talked about this one particular before we started recording this one, podcast. But yeah, one that really stands out, and this is going way back to the old Chicago Stadium where they had the All-Star Game '88, and that was the day after Michael had won already the slam dunk contest. Right. And so I was working for ABC Radio, doing some freelance work, and I'm doing stats between Johnny Most, Hall of Fame broadcaster for the Celtics, and Chick Hearn, Hall of Fame broadcaster for the Lakers, and I was close with both of them. They both took me under their wings. And so, but you have to remember, this is the time frame where the Lakers and the Celtics were the two dominant teams, and they faced each other almost annually in the NBA Finals. So there was just a rivalry, a competition, and it carried over to the two announcers, Johnny Most and Chick Hearn, who were longtime broadcasters for both organizations, and they did not like each other at all.
The Celtics-Lakers rivalry with the broadcasters.
Oh my God, it carried over, and so I'm fairly young at this point, and I'm sitting between them, and they were professional during the game. One would do color for a half, and the other one would do play-by-play, and then they would switch at halftime. All right, so if there was a break in the action, one would go to the bathroom or something like that, and let's say Johnny Most went to the bathroom, Chick Hearn to go, God, I can't stand him. He's such an asshole. He's such a crusty old fucker or whatever, something like that. And I'm thinking, oh my God, and then he would come back, and they were professional again, and then, Hearn would, take a break or something at halftime or go to the John himself, and then Johnny Most with that gravelly voice would go, he's such a motherfucker. I can't stand him. Blah, 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 blah.
I can't imagine why they would pair those two. That makes no sense to me.
Well, but it was actually smart marketing at that point, because the two teams, again, were always in the finals.
Yeah.
and they were taking advantage of, they were still very prominent in their careers or whatever. And ABC Radio at that time said, let's pair them together. It was a novelty thing.
Yeah, see, they would never do that today because you would have to have an athlete involved.
Yes.
An ex-athlete, a high-profile athlete, rather than two professional broadcasters.
Anyway, that's the way it was. I mean, I've worked with all the announcers over all the years, and I've been fortunate. I've learned a lot from some of them. Some guys are a little bit nicer than others, I'll admit it. But, there's also been, the color commentators were always former players. So whether it was Quinn Buckner, for the Pacers, who I was just a fan of, because I went to high school at the same time as he did, and he was winning championships at Thornridge, and I was just always a fan of his game, and so many other players over all the years. So I've been I also did it with, with Marv Albert, of course, with the Knicks, and of course Walt Frazier, Clyde. I used to love seeing Clyde come in because he would always have these weird outfits. I don't know how else to put it. He was Clyde.
How was Clyde to work with? Did he talk much?
No, he really didn't. He was very soft-spoken, to be honest with you. He's ultra cool, if you will, but he really didn't really have all that much to say. Most of the players who are commentators, I hate to use this terminology, are a dime a dozen. They're
pretty generic, yeah.
Pretty much.
It's funny, too, because a lot of the guys that didn't like doing any of the media during their playing careers, all of a sudden they see the broadcasting dollars out there after their careers, and they're like, where do I sign up? It's funny that some of the people that you've had approach you or have approached your bosses over the years wanting to get jobs in broadcasting, you're like, that guy? That guy didn't want to talk to me at all when he was playing, and now all of a sudden he wants to get a paycheck as a broadcaster.
You know who was interesting, and he's still doing it for the Celtics, and you've dealt with the White Mamba over the years. He was really fun to be with because he was very irreverent, and he would go off into tangents like I tend to do and just talk about things that were outside sports. Even before him, it was Tommy Heinsohn, working with Mike Gorman with the Celtics. So, I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of people in the game for a lot of years.
Yeah, the White Mamba, he's kind of on Kendall's no-fly list. He told Kendall in the press room at the United Center that he would draft him in the Big Three because they made Scalabrini a captain, like he was the Great White Hope or whatever, and he didn't take Kendall, so Kendall has no use for Scalabrini.
Oh, then when we have Kendall on this podcast, and we'll definitely talk about that. And I'm sure you worked with a lot of people, over the years, some of your experiences. I know you've had vast experiences.
Yeah, and it's funny, we talked about Scottie Pippen earlier, and Scottie was not a media-friendly guy during his playing career. He would grudgingly do interviews when he had to, and, now all of a sudden he's working all over the place doing media stuff, which is kind of funny. He was not a guy I would have ever imagined. Brian Urlacher's another one. I know this is not basketball related, but I did a show with him one year at NBC Sports Chicago, and he was very friendly, and he did fine. But I'm like, if I was thinking of one guy who would not want to be in front of a microphone under any circumstances, that would have been Urlacher. But it just makes for strange bedfellows, some of the guys that want to get involved in broadcasting. And, I had a chance to do a couple of games doing play-by-play when Neil Funk was taking the road games off the last couple of years. And that was such a career thrill for me because I remember going back as far as 7th and 8th grade, we used to take the old-fashioned tape recorders, with the cassette tapes, and we would pretend we were announcing when we weren't in the game. So my love for broadcasting goes back into grade school, and I always wanted to do play-by-play, and my career took me in a different path, doing mostly television news. And I finally got a chance to do that very late in my career, and it was such a thrill to do. The games went by so quickly, and I consider Stacey a really good friend, and he made it easy for me because Stacey, of course, has the gift of gab, and he's so talented. And I knew that if I got in trouble, he'd be there to bail me out. And it was a wonderful experience, and something that I've been doing this for 40 years, and those two games I got to do play-by-play rank right at the top of career highlights.
Well, and so many people that we've worked with here in Chicago, former players, among them, whether it's Stacey, a Pied Piper kind of person, Bill Winnington, the same thing. Pied Piper, I was fortunate enough to work on some of the broadcasts with him this past season, and other people, Norm. You worked
Right.
with Norm. Oh my God, I'm sure you have 1,001 stories about Norm.
And I
Will.
couldn't stand Norm and Jerry Sloan when I was a kid growing up in Milwaukee because they beat the hell out of the Bucks every time. They didn't always win, but they took a physical toll. So I told that to Norm. I said, Norm, first time I worked with him, I said, I couldn't stand you as a player because you were so physical and you were so tough to go up against, and you didn't take crap from anybody. And I got to know him over the years. The sweetest guy I ever wanted. We could do a whole show on Norm Midler.
Absolutely. He was the most generous of people that you may ever meet. Magnanimous, give you the shirt off his back. Big music lover. He had a collection of albums or whatever of music that just transcends decades and decades.
Well, you
Such
tell
a
stories
loss.
about hanging out with the guys from Chicago, going out with Mick Jagger. I mean, he lived a life. It was cut tragically short, but I'll tell you what, he got the most out of the years he was on this earth.
How amazing was it, in a sad way, that both he and Johnny Red Kerr, who was also obviously very prominent, passed away on the same day. How freaky was that?
It was unbelievable. We knew that Red had been in bad health, and his last year they tried to have him come on the broadcast occasionally to give a few thoughts on what he saw on the court, but his health was going badly. But Norm had some heart issues, and we knew that he wasn't 100% healthy, but there was nothing that gave you the impression that his life was at risk. And one night he just didn't show up for the broadcast, and somebody went to his home and found him there, and just so tragic. And I was at his funeral, and I actually spoke at his funeral, and just the reactions of people, you just see how much he was loved and how many lives he touched.
Well, I grew up on those Bulls teams from back in the 60s.
Yeah.
The ones that you hated, I loved, because that's where my love for basketball really started, and obviously with Norm and Jerry Sloan, God rest his soul also. I
Bob Love, Chet
Walker. Dick Motta, of course, was the coach. And I remember one game when I was a kid, and I wasn't that much. I was probably a teenager at this juncture. And the Bulls were playing, I think it was probably Portland. And Sidney Wicks, I think, was on, Portland. And Norm went after him with a chair.
Oh, yeah.
He's chasing Sidney, which Sidney Wicks was a tough what. Norm would have killed him, though.
Anything went during those days, I mean, it was just crazy how many fights there were back in the old NBA. I know in the 70s, the Bulls had a third-string center named Dennis Autry. And they would just put him in against Kareem just to get him irritated.
He elbowed Kareem, and Kareem decked him, didn't he?
Yeah. And those games were just, you never knew what would happen when the Bulls and the Bucks played back then, because Chicago Stadium was such a unique atmosphere for basketball, and you'd have people throwing things from the stands. I mean, you just never knew what was going to happen. So it was a strange chapter in NBA history, but the rivalry was born there, and it really continues to this day.
One of my favorite games watching growing up, I don't remember how old I am. I guess this is 1971, so I would have been 14, 15 years old at that point. And the Lakers came into Milwaukee, and they had been riding the 33-game winning streak. Unbelievable. That'll never be touched ever again, even though the Bulls had...
Miami got 27 in the LeBron era, yeah.
I don't think it'll ever happen again, in my opinion. Anyway... It was still Lou Alcindor at the time, and Oscar was on the team as well, and John Block and the McLaughlins and everybody else, and it was a great game, and the Bucks beat them that day, and you can almost feel it was a changing of the guard at that point, and that was one of my favorite games as a kid watching on basketball. All those experiences with the NBA just turned me into such a lover and passionate fan of this game.
And that's when the big man ruled, and now you can't even get him on the court. So we've done a total 180 when it comes to the role of the center. Every team we're talking about the draft. Can we get a big man? Who's the next big man that's going to revolutionize the league? Now people are looking at, we don't even want a center, and that's why the center position is supposed to be very good in this draft, but those guys are going to fall like rocks because nobody wants them anymore.
Well, who knows? Everything is cyclical in sports, as we well know. I mean, we talked about how the traditional point guard has gone by the wayside. I'm a big believer in it. I'm pretty old-fashioned. I think if you have a big man who can dominate, who can also hit shots from the outside, I mean, that's part of the game also. That's why I think Embiid is still, to me, the best player at that position, because he can go outside. So Karl Anthony Towns. They're both good three-point shooters.
The only thing I don't like about Embiid is he tends to disappear in games. You know, he'll get off to a good start. You know, he'll have 12, 14 points in the first quarter, and then you don't see him for long stretches. And part of that is Ben Simmons' fault and the guards for not getting him the ball. But I think that there's two things with him. His conditioning isn't what it should be. You know, he tends to get tired as games go on, and I've noticed that he's not as effective late in games. And I've noticed that his intensity seems to drift. That was Norm's favorite word, intensite. It seems like Embiid can't sustain that for 48 minutes. And Norm always read, just give me 48 minutes.
You know, but I just saw Embiid yesterday say, quoting that he wants to play his entire career with Simmons, which I found interesting. And I don't know if they're going to work in the long run.
Well, they're playing him at power forward now, which is another interesting thing.
Yeah.
I mean, Philadelphia has had really an underachieving kind of year, and they're trying to catch lightning in a bottle as they head into the playoffs. And who knows, maybe they will, but it seems like Brett Brown's not long for that head coaching seat.
All right, so Mark, I'm going to leave you with this as we wrap up this second version of Sharpshooters. And you know, we did another new podcast here on the Bears Barroom Network, and it's called Stuff Your Mom Threw Out. And it's a memorabilia show that I'm co-hosting with Scott Beatty, and we talk about memorabilia, and there's a couple of memorabilia things that I think you might be interested in, you know, because people pay a lot of money for things that I just don't understand. I'm just not one of those people, but somebody paid for not the first version of it, or I should say the real McCoy, but a photocopy of Michael's first contract with the Bulls. A photocopy.
Yeah, I think I saw that, yeah.
$57,000.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy.
I don't get it.
You know, there's certain things that could have a lot of value and you could display prominently, but that's not one of them. You know, I mean, what are you going to do with it? You paid all that money for it. You know,
I don't know. It's scratch paper to me.
I mean, as you know, as members of the media, are always scolded and don't ask for autographs. I did once with Michael Jordan. I got him to sign the famous poster where he's doing the slam dunk in the '88 contest. I have that in my man cave.
Oh, and
it's one of the few pieces of memorabilia that I have.
Yes, you know, very front and center. When you're a member of the media, you're forewarned. Do not ask for autographs. You can get your credentials taken from you. I do have Michael's autograph on two things for both my children, and I had him sign a basketball for my son and a photo picture for my daughter. Now, they're worthless, to be honest with you, because it says they put my children's names on it too.
Right, sure.
So, but that's not important. I mean, the fact that they both have something from Michael Jordan and their father was a hero to get it for them, to be honest with you.
And the time that I got my Michael Jordan autograph, remember when they used to have the Bulls bowling parties? Now they're very sterile and quiet. They used to get loud and people drank heavily at times.
Do you remember
Michael was 5 or 6 drinks in when I finally asked him for the autograph. And this was this was well after everybody was gone, so I was able to do it pretty easily.
So it's funny that you mentioned those bowling parties because we had a good time, and that was good food, good drink, whatever. Taj Gibson was always fun at those things. But Marcus Fizer one time showed up at the bowling party, and he had a pet snake. I don't know what the hell it was. It was a yellow snake that was about 12 feet long, and it was wrapped around his neck like a boa or something like that. That was probably the biggest contribution that Marcus Fizer ever made to the Bulls, uniform or non-uniform.
But that used to be a big deal, and the players would go and they would get into it, and they'd have competitions, and I guess they probably still do within themselves. But it's so quiet and so non-confrontational now. And of course, with Michael, everything was a competition. I remember him riding Cliff Livingston. He said Cliff thought he was a great bowler. He said he brought his own bowling ball and his own shoes, and I still beat him. I don't know if he did or not, but that's what he had to say in front of the camera.
Yeah, over the years, I think I bowled one time with Taj Gibson. Another time I bowled with Roger Powell, who was from Illinois, and he had a cup of coffee with the Bulls, at least during the preseason. So, those were good times for sure.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun along the way. There's no question about it.
Absolutely. We had a lot of fun here again today, Mark. I enjoyed this. And we're going to start, in the near future, we're going to start infiltrating with some people, some famous people. We'll get Kendall, I'm sure, and some other people.
I've talked to Stacey King. He says he'd be happy to jump on with us, so I'll have him along. We'll get Will Perdue on and Casey Johnson, some of the other great writers around the NBA, and it'll be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Fun again today, Mark. I appreciate it.
Yeah, glad the NBA's back. The games have been better than I expected, and let's keep it rolling.
All right, Mark, you have a great day.
You too.
Thanks.